Welcome to the School Leaders Podcast. My name is Dr. Gastred Harrigan, the podcast for current and emerging school leaders, those who support and supervise them. You will hear from passionate educational leaders who are transforming their schools, communities, and creating positive outcomes for students. I will also share my personal reflections and tips from over 15 years as a school leader. Together, we will talk about how to level up our schools and leadership practices. Hello, welcome to the School Leaders Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Gastred Harrigan. Before we get started with today's episode, I want to encourage all of our listeners to join the School Leaders Podcast community on Facebook. There we continue and extend our conversation from the episode. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you can be notified whenever a new episode is released. Today, I have a special guest, Dr. Joseph Williams III. As an experienced educator, Dr. Joseph Williams III recognized that an excellent and equitable education is the key to a world of opportunities for children. He grew up in Kansas, Missouri, and in Louisiana. Strong teachers, quality educational programs, and a supportive mother changed the trajectory of his life, which is why he has dedicated his life to ensuring that a student's race, identity, gender, economic status, or zip code do not determine their life's outcome. Dr. Williams is committed to investing in and working with students, teachers, leaders in the community to deliver a world-class educational experience for children. Dr. Williams started his K-12 career as a special ed teacher in Florida. He currently serves as a high school principal in Seattle, Washington, where he's leading a school turnaround and improve outcome for all students. Dr. Williams holds a master's degree in educational leadership from Nova Southeastern University, an MBA degree from William Howard Taft University, and a doctoral degree in educational administration from California Coast University. He also has an executive certificate in social justice leadership from Texas A&M University. Dr. Williams enjoys spending time with his family, morning workout, sports, and publishing a weekly newsletter on LinkedIn titled Elevating K-12 Education. Join me in welcoming Dr. Williams to the School Leaders Podcast.
Thank you, my brother. Appreciate you.
We appreciate you coming on the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, wow. Where do I begin? Well, first of all, I've always said that, I didn't choose education. I didn't choose K-12 education. K-12 education chose me. And, I was a pre-law major in undergrad, thought I was going to be a big-time lawyer making hundreds and millions of dollars. But, there's an old saying, if you want to make God smile, tell him your plans because he might have other plans for you. And so my last year in college, while I was, getting ready to enter law school in the next year, I only was taking one class a semester and I needed to make some extra money. So someone told me, hey, you can sub pretty much every day if you can handle the kids. And I was like, hey, might as well try something. And so, man, I was like a fish in water. I absolutely loved it. And I'll tell you, and I know sometimes, some educators in the beginning of their careers, they struggle with this, but nobody ever had to teach me how to handle a class, right? So from day one, when I went into a classroom, and maybe it was just my strict upbringing from my own mother, but from day one, I knew how to handle a class, whether I was dealing with a bunch of fifth graders, a bunch of second graders, or a bunch of juniors and seniors in high school. I never had a problem with managing a classroom. And I just felt like a fish in water. And I started really thinking like, man, and the crazy thing about it is everything associated with higher education for me was meant for me going to law school. And I really started doubting whether that was truly my path. And so and I'm a man of faith. More a man of faith today than I was back at, when I was 21, but I'm still a man of faith. I was raised that way. And I just prayed about it. I was like, God, if it's for me to, stay on this law school path, then keep that door open. But if it's not, I'm willing to look at another path. And so I think sometimes when we find ourselves in these situations, we can't be close-fisted. We have to open our hands, because the only way we can receive additional blessings is if we're open. And so I was open, and I made a compromise. I was like, okay, I still have this dream that I want to be a lawyer, but what I'll do is, I'm tired of being the poor, broke college student. I'm going to teach for a year, save my money, and then go to law school. Well, Dr. Harrigan, that was almost 30 years ago. And I'm still, I guess, in deferred law school status. I never made it. But I can tell you, my brother, I absolutely made the best decision I could have made for my life and for my career. And I love
awesome.
K-12 education. Yes.
That's awesome. Actually, it's funny. Same thing here. I love your phrase. If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plan, because mine was engineering, and today I'm in education too. So, looking at your experience, you've been an elementary principal, middle school, and now you're currently a high school principal. Share some of the lessons that you have learned leading schools.
Oh, wow. Where do I start? Well, I will tell you, the majority of my career has been at the high school level. And I always wondered, I was like, okay, why are some of my students that are really kind of falling through the cracks, and by the time they get here, they're in ninth grade and they're still reading on a third grade reading level? Why is that happening? And it always bothered me. And it was always third grade. And I never understood that, because, again, my background is not in education. So, I went through the alternative route to get certified in the state of Florida. And so it was like, it always bothered me that was the case, because obviously there's a huge gap between third grade and ninth grade, and you're playing a lot of catch up to get kids back up to par. And it's super difficult, because now you're asking a 14, 15-year-old kid to sound out, apple, they're not doing that, right? And so it makes it super difficult when they are reading at that level. But when I had the opportunity to go down and be an elementary principal, I quickly found out why students in high school that came in with a lot of learning gaps had those learning gaps, because our curriculum at the elementary level is specifically designed for our students to know how to read, write, and comprehend by the end of their third grade year, right? And so what happens is the curriculum fundamentally changes in fourth grade from learning to read to reading to learn, right? And so now you have this fourth grader that didn't get everything they needed in third grade, and the curriculum's not even designed to help them read, because there's an expectation that they already know how to read. And so then that gap just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And before you know it, they're a ninth grader on my doorstep, and they don't know how to read, and they're still stuck at that third grade level. And so for me, I think the biggest benefit that I brought back to the elementary and even to the middle school as a former high school teacher and principal was I know what is expecting or is waiting for those young people when they get to high school. So I know what they need to get to high school and be on grade level and be successful. And so, it's a different, it's a lot easier I'll say it like this, Doc. It's a lot easier to teach Jamal how to read as an 8-year-old than a 14-year-old, right? And
Absolutely.
So for me, it's like, let's make sure that every single student is on reading level, on grade level by the time they end their third grade year. And so, that's one of the things that I was like laser-like focused on as an elementary principal, was just an elementary leader, is making sure that our students, and really, I was fanatical about it, right? Because I know, and the stats prove it. If you do the research, if you look at the data, it's very, very clear. They are literally, Doc, building prisons based off the third and fourth grade failure rate of Black young men. And that's a sobering statistic, but it's true, because what happens is, and this is what people don't understand, if you have 18-year-old Johnny and he knows how to read and he's done everything he needs to do and he's graduated from high school, and you have 18-year-old Jamal and he kind of fell through the cracks, no child left behind, right? He was left behind. Guess what? Jamal's still gonna want everything Johnny wants, right? But Johnny did what he needed to do academically, and he's going to be able to go on to college, get a career, and have all the things he wants. Well, guess what? Jamal wants that same thing too. And if he didn't get what he needed to do, that's what happens. That's where this whole, school to prison pipeline happens, because we're not making sure that our students are prepared to be successful once they leave, because they still want the nice life. And if they can't get the nice life through legal ways, then unfortunately they'll follow the criminal path.
It's interesting you say that, because you're correct. I've read that research over and over again, and sometimes I wonder what will it take for not only school leaders. And when I say school leaders, I'm not just referring to principals and even superintendents. I'm also referring to our civic leaders and all the way up to the federal level. What would it take for us to really, if a child, didn't make it at third grade, how do we catch them up? And from your experience, having been a leader at all three levels, what are some of the things that maybe middle school, or even high school principal, like myself, a secondary principal where my building is 7 to 12, what are some of the things we can do to really help Johnny? Because the goal is to help Johnny be successful. Like you said, Johnny's going to want that life. What can we put in place? What systems and support we could put in place to help Johnny really catch up and ultimately be able to read and graduate?
Yeah. So one of the things that, and I'm glad you brought that question up, because, we're still tasked. I don't care. We take everyone. The one difference between public schools, and I would even say public schools, not only public schools and private schools, but even public schools and public charter schools, because they always like to say in charter schools that they don't cherry pick. Maybe so, maybe not, right? But what I'm saying is, I feel like when we're public school leaders, everyone can come, right? And our task as leaders is to educate everyone. And so whether you're talking about a student that has learning difficulties, a student that maybe has the capacity to learn, but they just kind of fell through the cracks, whether you're talking about a student that shows up on your doorstep and they don't know a lick of English at 14, 15 years of age, what do we put in place? You have to have those extra resources, that extra support. One of the things we did, for example, with our students that couldn't read or our students that didn't know the language, is we double dose. We double dose in English. So, we set up their schedule so they also had to take English, but they had to take English 2 periods a day, not just 1 period a day, right? Because us thinking that they were going to get the same level that a student that was on reading level was getting, and that they were going to somehow get caught up, that's just wishful thinking. So you had to do double dose reading. You also would do sometimes double dose with math, but definitely with reading. But math is important too, and people kind of discount math. Well, okay, if they don't know how to read, why are you double dosing math? People don't understand that a lot of math is word problems. Like if you can't read, you're not going to be able to do a lot of math, right? And so we double dose with math as well. And we had, in addition to that, we also, because you're going to hear a lot of people say, a lot of leaders might say, well, you can do a lot of after school stuff. Well, the difference between in school and after school is, in after school programs, that's totally voluntary. Like it's not mandatory. Like you can't make a student stay at school before or after a school day. The only day that you have a captive audience is during that actual school day, right? So you have to build in systems of support during the school day to ensure that those students get what they need. And so we would do some lunch and learn sessions. We would do double dosing. We would do pullouts out of their extracurricular activities, because if you think about it, I would say half of what we offer in terms of courses are extracurricular courses, right? So to me, there's no excuse for not building in systems and courses and support for those students during the school day. And if it means they have less extracurricular stuff, than the typical student, then so be it, because the goal is to make sure that they are ready to be successful, whatever level they leave you from. So if you're an elementary principal, you need to make sure they're successful when they matriculate on to middle school. If they're a middle school student, then you need to make sure that they're successful to handle high school when they hit 9th grade, right? And so to me, that's our charge. And I think anytime we allow a student to leave us, going from the elementary to middle or middle to high or high on into life, and they're not prepared, then we have failed that student. And it's not easy work. Like, I'll be honest, like it's easy for me to say that, Dr. Harrigan, but the reality is the hard work is still the hard work. And, nobody's batting 1,000 with this. And so part of it is resource-based, let's be honest, because what we're talking about here does require additional resources. And a lot of schools, particularly schools with students that are Black and brown, don't have the resources. So, these are great ideas, and, we did our best to put them in place. But truthfully, I wouldn't be totally forthright if I didn't say that we missed some things, because we had the right idea, we had the right goals, but a lot of times we didn't have necessarily all the resources that we needed to truly, help 100% of all of our students. But we helped a lot.
You thank you for sharing that. And yes, I agree with you. Leaders got to have system of support, regardless of where the child drop on your doorstep, whether you're at the middle school level or the high school level, and the child is not reading, or wherever the lack is. You got to create systems of support to ensure we support the child to ultimately be successful. And you're correct. Our brown and Black kids are typically, their schools often lack resources. And while that's a topic for another day, we do need to do better to make sure, every community, regardless of the child's zip code, get the resources that is needed to ensure we don't leave any child left behind. As you stated earlier. Now,
Yes,
expanding from the same thing of creating system of support, how as a current principal, high school principal, and you have been at all the level, how do we bring down barriers and really cultivate and maintain a positive school culture? Because, there's a whole saying that you could have a great strategy, but the culture of your school will eat your strategy for breakfast. So how do principals, school leaders cultivate and maintain a positive school culture to put those systems in place to ensure student success?
That's a good question. I definitely feel like it starts with the adults in the building. And, there's an African proverb that says it takes a village to raise our children. You have to have the support of the family. And family can look so many different ways, when it comes to our students. It could be obviously mom and dad. It could be just mom. It could just be dad. It could be grandma, grandpa. It could be a big brother. It could be a big sister. It could be an aunt, uncle. But there needs to be that partnership with the family. And so one of the things that we do at every school that I've ever worked at is, that first month, we always make a positive parent contact. The first time that a parent hears from a staff member should not be when Jamal or Johnny is in trouble, right? Like, it should be, hey, I'm super grateful that Jamal or Johnny is in my class. We're here to help and support them. We need your support, right? And that's a powerful statement to a parent that maybe the year before, the only time they heard from the school was when their child got in trouble, right? And so you start off with that positive, because again, yeah, we have that natural break between one year and the next year, but it's still very difficult to kind of keep everything in that previous year when you might have had difficulty in the previous year. So I'm also a big believer in that. I'm a big believer that every year is a clean slate with our students, right? I would hate for someone, and I'll use myself as an example, I would hate for someone to judge me when I was 17 based on how I was when I was 7, right? Or how I was when I was even in 7th grade, right? Because I know what a knucklehead I was in 7th grade, right? And so we all, and I think sometimes as adults, we forget that, Doc. I feel like, we need to remember that we were once children and we turned out all right. We were once knuckleheads and we turned out all right. We were once skipping class and we turned out all right. And so I think grace is a big thing with this as well, making sure that we are, remembering what it was like when we were that age, but also giving grace to our students when they're not actually doing what they need to do, and not having this kind of prejudice when it comes to our Black and brown youth, particularly our Black and brown boys, because I think, you could have one Black student that might be rambunctious and he's a problem, and you have another, student who's from a majority group and he's inquisitive and he has ADHD and we just need to support him, right? And so to me, I think making sure that we're not bringing in those built-in prejudices as it relates to, how a person looks or the color of their skin, and just making sure we treat all of our students equitably and making sure that we provide support for all of our students equitably as well. And so, yeah, I think culture is very, very important. And so also, I'm a big believer in restorative justice. I think in order to build the culture in your building, you have to have a restorative justice system in your school that ensures that you're not penalizing a student forever for a mistake they might have made, right? Just because a child made a bad choice doesn't make them bad. Just because a child made a poor choice doesn't mean that we put the scarlet letter on their forehead and we keep putting it back in their face, later on. I'm a big believer in, yes, there may be times where there needs to be consequence, but once we get the consequence, we restore them back into the family. We make it a teachable moment and we keep it moving forward, right? That's how we do it with our own kids, right?
Correct.
So why wouldn't we do that with our students? Because I look at it personally, like I have 1,200 children. They're my children because for 8 hours a day, their parents are entrusting me as the leader of the building and the rest of the staff to take care of their children for those 8 hours. So if I'm gonna give that grace to my own child, I'm gonna definitely give it to the other students in my building.
It's interesting you use the word grace because oftentimes, and I find myself in the past 2-3 years addressing and bringing that up, that often the educational system doesn't know how to educate our Black boys.
Sure.
And society, and sometimes it bleeds into our schools. We see them as threats. Other kids, other major cultures, right? Ethnics could do the same thing. And because sometimes we don't understand the culture and how the Black male is, and so everything they say become a threat, where really he was just expressing himself. He's not expressing it in the norms, how you would expect him to expect, but he's expressing it how he knows how, and really from the lens of his culture. And we have to be honest, part of that culture is his neighborhood, his environment. Sure. And so school leaders, as you indicated, and as part of that culture, have to have a grace mindset, a restorative justice mindset where, yes, if you did something, we're going to give you consequences, but when you return, you start on a clean slate. 100%. And we are going to put systems in place. And part of that system may need to be PD and staff development of how, so that our preconceived notions, our biases, we all have them, including myself, 100%. Do not tend and we don't make decision based on my conceived notions and how I was raised, but really trying to understand that kid's culture and really at the end of the day, what they're trying to express themselves and what they're trying to say, and not necessarily view everything as necessarily a threat. So yes, addressing the culture of the school becomes very, very important. I know you
Can I add something else to that, Doc?
Mm-hmm.
I wanted
Absolutely.
to, I absolutely agree. And obviously we're on the same page with that, but I also feel like it needs to be a teachable moment for our young Black men. And, I know when I was growing up, and now I'm dating myself, but, I'm in my mid 50s. And the one thing that my mom taught me, which I don't think is being taught enough with our young Black and brown boys, is the ability to code switch. And so the way I conducted myself in my neighborhood, I had to conduct myself in my neighborhood, or I wouldn't have survived in that neighborhood, right? So I'm not saying that you have to totally not be who you are, right, when you're in your neighborhood, because that might be your only way to survive. So I 100% get that, but I also feel like it's very, very important for our young people to know how to have the ability to code switch and not necessarily use the language that they might use in their neighborhood, to know how to use academic language when they find themselves in professional situations, and to know how to conduct themselves accordingly when they find themselves in these professional environments, whether we're talking about school, a job, and ultimately their career. Because if we don't teach them that, then I also think we're also setting them up for failure as well. So I don't want to be a part of the problem either, you know what I'm saying, when I'm not saying, look, I'm going to give you grace, but Mr. Jones might not give you grace on that job, right? So you have to, be That's able important. To kind of operate in both worlds, right? And so I don't think we do enough of that. And obviously we're two Black men talking about this, but I think it is incumbent upon us as Black male leaders, as Black leaders, period, no matter what your gender, to make sure we're teaching our kids how to conduct themselves accordingly. Yeah, I'm going to give you grace. I get it. I like rap music too, right?
Right.
But there's certain ways that you need to act in certain environments to ensure that you're not going to be singled out stereotype all those things that we know happen to a lot of our Black and brown boys. Does that make sense?
No, that definitely makes sense. And you are correct. We were taught how at home, how to code switch. And I'm finding more and more of our students, not just Black males, really across students in general, do not know how to do that. And in your opinion, is there a place for schools, teachers, leaders to really assist our students to understand the different environment and how you act? Because, is there a room for us to do that? Because I don't think there's not enough people in their lives in certain environment teaching them like we had when we were growing up.
That's fair.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's fair. I think, I still feel like that family community piece is super important. You have to have different groups. You have to have different, not government organizations, but, I even say that, like faith-based organizations that are willing to pour into your community as well. I know I started a program at every school that I've been in, except the current one I'm in, because this is only my first year there. And it's called Boys to Men, right? And so one of the things I did with that group, it was for Black and brown boys, and it was teaching them the exact things that we're talking about. It was role playing with them. How do you conduct yourself? I know you don't even drive right now. You don't even have a license. But how do you conduct yourself when you do start driving and you are stopped by the police and you do feel like it's unfair, right? And so you role play those kind of things so that they know how to conduct themselves accordingly, because what you're teaching them might save their life, right? And so, yeah, when you start talking about having to teach them, it's super hard sometimes to do it during the school day. But I do think especially when you're talking about middle and high school, you have clubs, you have organizations, you have groups. I know I can think of 100 Black men that's in most cities in America that can come in, and you got Big Brother, Big Sister. You got a lot of organizations that will come in and be mentors, big brothers, big sisters to some of our students, and really teach them some of the things that we might not have the time or the resources, for that matter, to teach them during the school day. But it's super important. I think about even myself. Yeah, I had that at home, but I also can remember getting those lessons even at church. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not sitting up here as some just religious guy, but I'm just saying those are the types of environments I found myself in where I was still getting, for lack of a better term, schooled, right, on how I should conduct myself and how I should carry myself. And so that piece, let's be honest, is missing in our communities as well now, too, because like you said, whether we're talking about Black kids or brown kids or what have you, there was a time, man, when, and I'm dating myself now, I've been in this thing 30 years. There was a time if a kid said a curse word in front of me, they would feel so ashamed and be apologizing and everything else. And now they'll just cuss in front of you like it's no big deal, right? And might cuss you out, right? So it's a different culture. It's a different generation. So there's a lot of things at play here. But again, like I said, education begins at home. I tell people all the time, when I was an elementary principal, I said, oh, this is their first year. No, they've been in school for 5 years. If they come to us as kindergartners, they've been in school for 5 years. Somebody been teaching them something.
Absolutely.
Like they don't come to our school at 5 years of age as a blank slate. Some might cuss you out at 5 years old. Like, I'm just being honest, right? So that's learned behavior. I tell people all the time, all beliefs are learned beliefs. All behavior is learned behavior, right? And so when a kid comes in and they off the chain, if they are at 5 or 6 years of age, that's learned behavior. They saw somebody doing that, right? And so to me, the earlier we can get to our young people, the better. That's why I'm a big proponent of Head Start, pre-K programs. You can get those young people at 3, 4, 5 years of age, and it can make all the difference in the world, because those are so impressionable years in terms of our students and our young people. And the more you can pour good into them at those younger ages, the better off they'll be. The more you can teach them. Like, you have some kids, I mean, when I went and I was the elementary principal in Kansas City and in St. Louis, and I can remember students coming to my building at 5 years of age, had never held a pencil in their life. Didn't know an A from a B, a D from a Z, right? What's a number? I'm telling you, some of these kids are literally zombie-like because they're so used for 6, 7, 8 hours a day just watching TV all day, or being on a computer all day, or being on their mama's phone or whatever. So These are real issues. And I think, foundationally, if we don't get our young people as early as possible and start really pouring in these values and, what they need to know academically at whatever stage of life they are as early as possible, it just makes that gap. We always talk about the gap. That achievement gap just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So.
And thank you for sharing those various strategies, because again, like you said, some of the things leaders can do is to bring outside agencies, community-based agencies into those schools, whether it's as a club, to provide and provide those mentorship, whether it's faith-based, but whether it's civic organization, whatever the organization, bring in those resources to really help our students, all students, including the young ladies, how to be a young woman, how to, be a woman of a woman of excellence. So again, thank you for sharing those things.
Yes, sir.
Shifting a little bit, as a principal leading a diverse school population, reflect and share your top strategies that principals, assistant principal, even emerging school leaders could implement to move and improve student achievement in their school.
Yeah. So again, I really feel like it's a partnership. I mean, the expectations have to be there. And so even in the school I'm in right now, like, we're setting again, because, I compare changing a culture to kind of trying to turn around the Titanic. It's not going to happen just like that, right? It takes time. It also requires consistency. So whatever the expectations that you have for your students, first of all, they need to be the same. Because what happens a lot of times is we don't have the rigor that we need to have for our students, right? Because we are compassionate, which we should be, but we should also be firm and fair and consistent in what our expectations are. Does that make sense? Because at the end of the day, we have to be compassionate, and we have to understand that, there can be no teaching and learning if students don't know where their next meal is coming from, or they are homeless, they got put out, or mom and dad broke up the weekend. I get all that. I'm one of those kids. I'm sure you have stories like that too. So, we can definitely empathize, but we can also ensure that these are teachable moments that allow our students to develop that grit that they're going to need to get through life. So if you're dealing with for example, at the elementary level, if you're dealing with a Jamal as a 7 or 8 year old and they're going through these things, you 100% have compassion for them, for sure. But at the same time, you still have to keep those expectations high, because if the only focus is on what they're going through outside of that building, then you never focus on what they need inside that building to ensure that the cycle does not continue with Jamal. Then we're not doing him a service, right? We're doing him a disservice. And so it's a balancing act. Don't get me wrong. What I'm saying is not easy, Dr. Harrigan, but it's still it's a balancing act to ensure that he gets what he needs, while at the same time, the school does what they need to do to address whatever issues that they might be having outside of the school building. Does that make sense?
It does. And that's very important to ensure, while we empathize, that we are delivering and setting up a learning environment that is rigorous, that is engaging, and all, at the end of the day, they are learning and they are growing. That's key.
And again, I still can't stress enough that family piece, because you have to have someone. I'll put it to you like this. Let's say Jamal is one of my students. Let's say I'm a principal at the elementary level. He's a third grader. He looks up to me. I'm a fellow Black man just like he is. So I get that. That's great. But there's someone outside of that building that's having just as much, if not more, influence on Jamal than Dr. Williams, right? Because I only see Jamal 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Somebody sees him the rest of that time, 5 days a week, plus the weekend, when I don't see him at all, right? So we have to ensure, even if there's turmoil in his life, that at least in terms of what we want for Jamal, the family and the school are on the same page, or in lockstep as one on what's best for Jamal, right? And so to me, that piece, we can't discount it, because again, like I said, we can have a great impact and influence on that young person, but someone away from that building is having just as much, if not more, impact on that child.
And that's important. So that brings the importance of having that parent, that home school connection relationship, ensuring that it is positive, ensuring that line of communication or relationship is consistently being built on, to ensure that we're empowering our families, regardless where they are, we're empowering them to ensure to provide the best learning environment, or to continue to support Jamal while Jamal is at home. Dr. Williams, a lot of the listeners that listen to this podcast are also emerging leaders and assistant principals, considering or looking to move into principalship. What are a few tips or advice you would share with them?
Wow, that's a great question. The first thing I would say is, in order to be a great leader, you first have to be a great follower, right? Because I'm sure there's some people that are probably listening to the sound of my voice that are saying, oh, I could do a better job than my AP. Well, somebody's going to say the same thing when you get in that position too, right? So just make sure you remember that. But no, in all seriousness, I think it's super important that you are excellent in whatever you're doing right now, currently. So for me, I'll use myself as an example. I'm currently a principal. At some point, I want to be a superintendent. Well, I can't even think about becoming a superintendent unless I'm, demanding excellence of myself as a current principal, right? And so if you're a teacher and you want to be an AP, then someone should be looking at you right now and saying, this person is excellent in everything that they do in their classroom, from lesson preparation, engaging students, print-rich classroom. It's a standards-based classroom. They're the facilitator of the learning environment. They're not the sage on the stage. They're the guide on the side. They're making sure that all students are engaged and they're learning and that they're growing. And so when you do that in the classroom, you don't even have to go looking for a promotion. They're going to come looking for you, because they're saying, if you can do it in your classroom and environment and you're impacting 20 to 30 students, then if you have those same qualities, now you can have a greater impact on the whole school environment. And now, instead of 20 to 30 students that you're impacting, now you're impacting the entire school that might have 500, 600, 1,000 students. And so to me, the first thing you have to do is just really be excellent in what your current role might be. And networking is super important as well, because if you're networking outside of your building, not just inside your building, but outside of your building, be willing to invest in yourself. Okay. Make sure that, yes, you're going to do the necessary. Everybody that, ultimately applies for an AP or a principal job, they're qualified and they're certified, but what are you doing above and beyond what is the minimum requirement to get that position? Are you networking? Are you investing in personal coaching or executive coaching to get better in your craft? Maybe you need to get better in various areas of K-12 education that will set you apart, because you have to look at it like, hey, you're competing. When you go for any interview at any level, teaching, AP, principal, district level, superintendent, there are other people that are going for that job. So you need to ask yourself, what sets you apart from the other people that are applying for this position? What makes you remarkable? And I always define remarkable as something worth making a remark about. So when people look at your resume, when people look at your body of work, do they see remarkability, or do they just see, okay, they had the bare minimum requirements to take this job? Be remarkable. Don't be average.
That's awesome. Be remarkable and don't just be average. And that's important. You said, everybody meet the minimum requirement. What are you doing to differentiate yourself from the pack, from the rest? Everybody want that position. Everybody want that raise. Everyone want that seat, want that parking spot. What are you doing to differentiate yourself, to really be remarkable and scale things up? And thank you for sharing those. It's important to network. It's important to really hone in and see what areas you need to improve in, what areas you need to expand and be the best you can be, or be remarkable.
Yes, sir.
Share, as we wrap up this interview, and thank you again for coming on, share with us your favorite book or quote and why.
Oh, wow. I have so many favorite books. I'm actually reading a book right now, and it, ironically enough, doesn't have anything to do with K-12 education. It's a book by Gary Vanderchuck. It's called Crush It. And it just talks about just being excellent, man. Like, I mean, and thinking outside the box. And like I said, truthfully, it doesn't have anything to do necessarily with K-12 education as a profession. But I'm also, that's one of the ways that I like to grow as well. I like to, glean from other professions, whether we're talking about entrepreneurship or, like you said earlier, engineering, whatever area. I think it's important to kind of expand your mind. And so, yeah, that's been a great book. And truthfully, I want to say it was actually written in 2009, but it's so powerful. And it's given me a lot of great ideas as it relates to my own show, because, I have a show, and just expanding. And one of the things, just to share with your audience, that it talks about is that everybody's a brand, Dr. Harrigan. Everybody's a brand. You're Dr. Gastric Harrigan Incorporated. I'm Dr. Joseph Williams III Incorporated. And if we don't start looking at ourselves like that, then we're going to get left behind too. Right. So, I think that's very, very important. And yeah, I've gotten a lot out of that book. And what's been amazing about that book is a lot of the things I'm on the right path, right? Because a lot of the things that, I've been reading, I'm kind of doing them. And so it's just making me double down on what I need to do to, like I said, build my brand. And when I say my brand, I'm talking about my personal brand and my professional brand. And just being more open, because that's another thing it talks about, is just being more open with your audience, being more open with what you share about your career and your family. You don't have to go into the weeds about your family, but everybody has a story. You take that word history, his story, right? You break it up, that's what it says. His story, history, right? And so to me, everybody has a story, and I think it's important to tell your story, because that's what resonates with people. Long before we were writing, that's how we told. That's how things were passed down, by telling the story to the next generation. And so, that's been a really powerful book for me. And what was the other part of that question?
Again, why are you reading that book, and what you
Oh,
glean
okay.
from it?
So I answered.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
Okay.
And thank you for sharing that I think it's important that leaders read outside of their typical niche or education. As you mentioned, currently I'm reading the 12-week year. And
Okay.
you're right, it has nothing to do with education, but really has to do with execution, time management, getting things done. And really it ties in a bit, because as a school leader, you got to manage your time, you got to execute, but really in the sense that none of the stories, none of the concept necessarily tie directly to education. But I think if you're going to be a diverse, and earlier you mentioned the word remarkable, then it's important that you're reading from other fields, especially if it's going to really help you lead as a leader in general. Sure. Because at the end of the day, before we can lead others, we must lead ourselves. So I know you also have a show. Thank you for coming on the podcast. So tell us a little bit about some of the other things you're doing besides being a school principal. I know you have a wonderful show. Everyone listening, I recommend you go check it out. So tell us a little bit how people can connect with you and listen to your show.
Yeah, so thank you for that. Yeah, I during the pandemic, well, actually before the pandemic, I'll go further than that. I actually started a podcast. I feel like the K-12 profession is the greatest profession in the world. I feel like we're the profession that makes all other professions possible. I don't care who we're talking about. I don't care if we're talking about Elon Musk, Bill Gates, the president of the United States, Barack Obama. If you go back in their life, there was a teacher, counselor, AP, principal that had an impact on their life, right? And so I don't feel like we in this country in particular get enough credit for what we do. And so I felt like it was important to showcase K-12 educators, K-12 leaders, and what they were doing and how they were making an impact in their communities through a podcast. And I actually started it out as the My K-12 Career podcast back in around 2015. And then, I did that until like 2017. And I moved overseas. I actually was a principal in the Middle East for a couple of years. And right when I came back in 2019, the pandemic hit about 6 months after I came back. And so I knew when I came back, I was going to start my podcast again. But then, with the pandemic hitting and everybody having to go on Zoom or Teams or, some form of video, I was like, man, this is the perfect time for me to not make just this a podcast, but make this a video show. And so in the summer of 2020, I changed and rebranded my show from the My K-12 Career Radio podcast to the My K-12 Career Show. And it was through Zoom. And, I actually do it through a newsletter called Elevating K-12 Education on LinkedIn. And the My K-12 Career Show, all the shows are actually on YouTube. And so I just spent this last year just interviewing amazing people like yourself, Dr. Harrigan. Shout out to you for coming on my show earlier in the year. And so, just being able to, interview amazing people like yourself who have amazing stories to tell about their life and about their K-12 career and how they chose the profession and the impact that they're making in the profession. It's been really good, and hasn't even been going on for a year yet. It won't even be a year until June of 2023. It started in June of 2022, and now we have almost 5,500 people that have subscribed to the show, and it's just growing by leaps and bounds. And I'm just really enjoying, talking to people, and it has allowed me to, connect with amazing leaders like yourself, Dr. Harrigan, and even come on your show. And I've had opportunity to go on other shows and just really build my network, build my brand, just like I was talking earlier about the importance of building your personal and professional brand. I feel like all of us as human beings in this entire world are consumers of content, but I'm going to challenge everybody that's listening to the sound of our voice, Dr. Harrigan, to not only be consumers of content, but be creators of content, right? Everything we're putting out here is evergreen, and evergreen simply means that when somebody hears your podcast for the first time, it's new to them. Everybody that looks at my shows for the first time, it's new to them. So 20 years from now, Jamila, my great granddaughter, might see my show for the first time, and I might not even be on this earth. So it's very important to not just be a consumer of content, but be a creator of content. So please check us out.
You have a fantastic show. Again, it's on YouTube, but it's primarily published through LinkedIn. So everyone listening, go and check out the show. Dr. Williams is doing an amazing job. He's crushing it. So again, let's go listen to his show, and you will hear from amazing leaders who are doing great things, and you will also get insight. And also subscribe to his newsletter where he shares various tips and strategy for educators, for not only leaders, but for everyone in the K-12 sector. So again, Dr. Williams, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. All the best.
Thank you for joining me today. Please consider subscribing to the podcast, leave a 5-star rating and a comment, share this episode with a friend, and on social media. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook for leadership ideas and tips. Again, thank you for joining me today. Until next time.